really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here today for another episode. Today I'm talking about something that I am very much experiencing right now in the moment that I think might be affecting many of you as well, which is how to hold on to love in the midst of fear. And the reason for this is that as I record this, we are undergoing a very important election here in the U.S., and it feels as though a lot is hanging on this particular election, but honestly, regardless of the outcome of the election, we have a lot of problems going on in our country right now, and a lot of things that are up in the air and uncertain in the future. So no matter which side of the political divide, and unfortunately it is a divide, but no matter which side you're on, each one of us is probably feeling some trepidation about the aftermath of this election. Some people are predicting that there will be violence. And even beyond that, beyond the political issues, we know that climate change and the economy are big issues that we're trying to deal with, and also figuring out how we want to live in this country and how we want to just be together and be here side by side, be neighbors, and how we want to care for each other. I've spoken before about living with uncertainty in the past and also choosing love over fear. But right now, today, this feels very real and very much in our faces. This is the issue each one of us who's trying to live a more spiritual life has to grapple with right now. So, the reality is that there is fear all around us, and fear is a very good marketing tool. And in fact, I was looking online, there are workshops and webinars that teach people who want to sell things how to utilize fear in order to manipulate customers into buying. And the reason for this, I've talked about before, but our brains are far more attentive to negative emotions like fear, anger, guilt, shame, than they are to positive emotions. And this is from the primitive parts of our brain, and it's designed to protect us. That part of our brain is designed to recognize danger wherever it exists and to alert us to danger to help us survive. So that part of our brain is particularly sensitive to all sorts of negative emotions. In fact, some researchers suggest 10 times more sensitive to negativity than to positive messages. So we are wired to respond to negative emotions and negative images, particularly to fear. That's why it's universally used by people who want to sell things, including politicians. To get people to take action, you make them feel afraid, and they will listen to you and they will do what you tell them. And we really are, in some ways, victims of our own primitive brains, our lower consciousness, unless we develop our higher consciousness and can act and behave from our higher selves instead of our lower primitive brain. And that is the essence of everything I'm working on spiritually. I'm learning how to strengthen and grow my higher self so that I can be directed and guided through my life by a higher part of my brain and my consciousness than this lower primitive brain and the ego. And so this is the essence of my book, The Journey from Ego to Soul, as well. So we will always be susceptible to fear. Other people will be able to manipulate us using fear until we can strengthen our higher consciousness enough to the point where we can hear it and listen to it, and we can rely upon it when we are in times of uncertainty and times of fear. So I want to talk about how we can hold on to love, which has to be our higher consciousness. The ego doesn't really care about love. So our higher consciousness focusing on love, even though there is hatred and anger around us, bitterness, divisiveness, and fear all around us. And one thing that I do, I call on the certain mentors that I've found for my life that show me how to live in uncertain, frightening times. And I use the wisdom that they have taught about living through the experiences they've had in their own lives. And two of them I'll talk about a little bit and read some quotes from are Nelson Mandela and Viktor Frankl. And so Nelson Mandela, you may realize, was imprisoned in South Africa for 27 years for his political beliefs being against apartheid. And he spent that time while he was in prison writing his book, Long Walk to Freedom. But Nelson Mandela has been such an amazing role model for me of how to go through literally torture and discomfort and pain and agony, and how to be in really one of the worst situations you can imagine, imprisoned by people who are your so-called enemies, only to 27 years later walk out the door to freedom and find the way to forgive the very people who kept him in prison all that time. And I'm in awe of that, and I think it's really beautiful. And obviously, he couldn't have found his way to forgiveness on that first day of his freedom if he hadn't been working on that for a long time. So I believe he used his time in prison to really grow his consciousness and to work on these spiritual issues. But he said, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. And that's such a wise statement, that when we do hold on to anger and bitterness and even our fear, we end up making prisoners of ourselves, trapping ourselves within those negative emotions. And we need to learn how to let go of them in order to get to that place of love. And so another quote from Nelson Mandela, he said, I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. And I talked about this once before, how to not tumble into despair when things go wrong and when we're frightened about the possibilities for the future. How do we keep ourselves facing the sun and taking one step forward? And I love that imagery. And I love the idea of keeping ourselves as much as possible in a more optimistic state instead of giving in to that primitive parts of our brain that is constantly looking for negativity and constantly focusing on it. How can we stay balanced in the moment and utilize our higher consciousness, our higher wisdom, the spiritual tools that we've learned to keep ourselves always facing the sun and moving forward, not denying or repressing the fear and the negative emotions that exist for us, but learning how we can live with them and not be controlled by them and not be imprisoned by the ego and by our lower mind. So these quotes I read from Nelson Mandela and just having read his book, Long Walk to Freedom, have really informed me that it's possible to go through a horrible time. And the fears I have in my head about what could happen in the future may not even be as bad as what Nelson Mandela had to live through. And yet he survived it, and he came through it, in fact, an amazing, beautiful, better person than he may have been when he entered prison. And so no matter how dire the circumstances are that befall us, there is a way that we can continue to face the sun and continue to take even the tiniest steps forward. And Nelson Mandela has shown us that. So I use that as inspiration for myself when I'm looking ahead at what is going to happen over the next week. What are we facing? How might life change for us? And then my next mentor that I think about a lot and talk about a lot is Viktor Frankl. And you may know his story that he was a psychiatrist who was in a concentration camp during World War II. And he served as a doctor for the clinic of other prisoners in the concentration camp and took care of many people as they were dying in the clinic. And he wrote his book, Man's Search for Meaning, about the things that he learned by observing other prisoners in the concentration camp. And he came up with something called logotherapy, which he used in his work afterwards because he obviously survived himself. And logotherapy, which is actually meaning therapy. And he talks about the importance of finding meaning in life in every single thing that we experience. So he said the people who survived the concentration camp were people who were able to find some sort of meaning, any sort of meaning in the suffering they were experiencing. And he himself found meaning in caring for other prisoners, in helping to give them some kind of comfort at the end of life, and listening to their stories, and then just envisioning a way to learn these lessons and learn these messages and share them with other people someday when he was on the other side of this concentration camp. So he came up with a quote saying that the salvation of man is through love and in love. He concluded that the most important thing that anyone can focus on, and he learned this again from the other prisoners in the concentration camp, is love. Love is the thing that can carry us through even the darkest days, the deepest, most painful suffering that we could encounter. And I believe that's what Nelson Mandela was talking about as well. He remained in a state of love in order to find a way to forgive his captors when he was released from prison. So my goal for myself during all of these days is to continue to remain as much as possible in a state of love. And I realize as we talk about love, sometimes we might even be wondering what exactly is love. And I can talk a little bit about what I experience when I feel I'm in a state of love and what love feels like to me during those times. And so I've thought of a number of different words and phrases that describe how I would say love feels to me when I'm embodying it, when I'm carrying it, when I'm transmitting it. And first of all, the first word that comes to me is light. Love feels like this soft, amazing, beautiful light that is all around me, but also infuses me. It's throughout my body. I carry it in my heart, but it's in every cell. It's like this beautiful light energy, not a harsh, piercing light. It's a soft, warm, and beautiful light. But at the same time, it's a light that brings clarity. It's a light that shines within the darkness so that I can see things much more clearly when I'm in that state and experiencing that light of love. For me also, though, love is a form of calm energy. And those two may sound like an oxymoron. Calm and energy may sound like opposites, but when I'm in a state of love, I feel calm deep inside of me, throughout me. I feel like I am infinitely calm and able to be observant, to see and take in everything without getting into a state of upset or disarray. I can remain steady and calm throughout it. And yet, it is also a state of being energized to a certain extent. So I'm calm, but calm with a sense of energy, potentiality, possibility that is also there at the same time. So it's not a calmness that causes me to become apathetic or drowsy. It's an energized calmness. Again, I understand that sounds like an oxymoron, but that's the only way that I can describe this feeling of calm energy that comes over me when I'm feeling this state of love. Also, a sense of focus, being able to, as I said before, see clearly, but to attune all of my attention and my energy into what matters the most and what's most important in the moment. And so it's an ability to let go of everything else, the distractions and everything else that's swirling around me, and to focus in and see and attune with what is most important in this moment. So there's an attentiveness, but again, along with the attentiveness, a sense of relaxing into that attunement, relaxing into the connection. There's also a sense of knowing how to be present and how to hold space. So within this state of love, with the calmness, the stillness, the focus, the energy, there's also a sense of creating this vast, even infinite space, but it's still a container. It's a container that can hold whatever is happening around me, whatever is happening in the world, on this planet, in the universe, whatever is there, whatever else exists, I'm able to hold it in this vast container that this sense of love, divine love, I would say, creates for me. So it isn't just free floating and wild. In a sense, there is a sense of a container of some sort that is there holding all of this, holding it in the most beautiful, gentle, and yet strong way. There's a sense of strength in all of it. When I experience that I'm sending love to other people, it feels to me as two separate things radiating, like rays of light and love coming from me, and also ripples or waves that are flowing out at the same time. And I can visualize that and see it in my mind, but I also have a visceral, embodied sense of that energy of just the rays and the ripples of love that are moving through me and out, into and out of me. And then one more word, the word soothing, comes to mind, that this love comes from beyond me and it is infinitely soothing. So the more I'm able to get myself into this state of higher consciousness where I experience the love, the more soothing it is to whatever distress is traveling through me as well. The more I allow the love to be present, the more it soothes whatever distress is there at the same time. So those are just the words that come to mind as a way of describing what I mean when I'm talking about love, when I'm talking about trying to be in that state of love. But, we've spoken about this before, that the opposite of love is fear. And when tremendous amounts of fear are present, it can be very difficult to get into that place of love, to remember love, to get myself back to that higher consciousness view and experience of divine love that is present, as I said before, around me, within me, through me. So part of the work here is to learn how to manage fear and how to experience the natural, normal fear that arises within us without being overcome by it, without being taken over and consumed by the fear. And one of the first things is to learn how to pause for just a second the moment the fear begins to arise, to be able to pause. Sometimes a deep breath or two can help to stop for just a moment because, as I said, the more primitive brain, lower consciousness, is always looking for that fear and ready to amplify it and ready to utilize it to control my behavior and my actions in the moment. But if I can stop for a second and pause with a deep breath, I can activate the relaxation response in my own body. I can tune in, I can improve my focus, I can make more space, and I can begin to let in this light of love that is also there at the same time. And gradually, as I said, it begins soothing the fear and the despair and whatever type of distress is beginning to arise in me. So that is part of the practice that I work on for myself as I'm learning how to be in a fearful world, how to live within fear with my own fearful thoughts and with the fearful things that I read in the news and on social media. How do I live with that without being overcome and overwhelmed by it? How can I get myself back to a state of love? So I wanted to continue on with the statement from Viktor Frankl that began, "The salvation of man is through love and in love." He's talking again about his experience with prisoners in the concentration camp. "I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved. In a position of utter desolation, when man cannot express himself in positive action, when his only achievement may consist in enduring his sufferings in the right way, an honorable way, in such a position, man can, through loving contemplation of the image he carries of his beloved, achieve fulfillment." So what Viktor Frankl is saying here is that one of the ways we can get ourselves into this state of love is to focus on our own beloved. Who is it that we love so fully and deeply and thoroughly with our body, mind, and soul? Who is it that we love? And to focus on the image of that which we love to help us remember love, to help us get back into that state of love. And so it seems clear to me that he witnessed that over and over again, that there were people in the concentration camp who were dying, who were being treated so brutally, but who were able to experience love and remember love over and over again by thinking of just the image of their beloved. And I think that's a really beautiful way to remind us of a tool, a technique for getting back to love when fear begins to overtake us, remembering the image of our beloved. Now, our beloved may be a person, but for some of us, a beloved is a pet, or maybe it's a place. Maybe it's even a place in nature where we feel deeply connected. And so each of us has to know, what is my beloved? What is it that I love so deeply that can take me back to this higher place of being loved? So that is one of the exercises that we can work on for practicing getting ourselves out of the fear state and into a state of love. But next, another person whose teachings I rely on heavily and have over time is Rumi, the poet Rumi. And so I want to read to you what Rumi wrote about love. "Keep walking, though there's no place to get to. Don't try to see through the distances. That's not for human beings. Move within, but don't move the way fear makes you move. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground." That's absolutely one of my favorite poems from Rumi. I love this idea. First of all, don't open the door to the study and begin reading right now. I think that's actually really important advice. We have to monitor carefully just how much news and information we take in during these days of uncertainty. And when there's a lot of frightening information out there, we have to titrate it somewhat and protect ourselves a little bit from the tsunami of negativity that could wash over us. But I love his image of take down a musical instrument, create beauty if you want to find your way to love, make music, make art, garden, bake bread, do something to create beauty in the world. And that's Rumi's idea for how to get into this state of love. And I think that's exquisite. I absolutely adore that. So focus on your beloved, make art, make beauty, create something in the world if you need to get out of fear and back into a place of love. And then I wanted to end with another quotation that I've been hearing about recently because I've been listening to a podcast that's looking at some of the writings of Julian of Norwich, who was a mystic from England, and some of her writings are really quite powerful. And so I wanted to end with this verse, and I think this is a reminder that we all need to have right now as we're trying to maintain our footing and not lose our way and fall into the pit of despair, but to keep ourselves focused on love, keep ourselves out of being controlled by fear. And Julian of Norwich, and she was cloistered by choice in a monastery where she lived in a tiny cell for most of her adult life that had two windows, one that faced the street and one that faced the altar of the cathedral so she could see Mass when it was performed. And Julian would sit at the window facing the street and answer questions of people who walked by and people who wanted to talk to her about life and spirituality. And she spent her time in that little window just talking to people and dispensing wisdom. But anyway, I'll end with a quote from Julian of Norwich. She wrote, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. For there is a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and will never let us go." And that is my final reminder when we're struggling to find love within ourselves, to remember that love is a force that moves through the universe, so much bigger than us, so much more magnificent than we can even grasp or begin to understand. But love is this divine force, again, that's all around us and that actually is holding us even though we don't realize it most of the time. And so as we go through these days over, the next weeks or so, we're facing uncertainty, we're facing fear. We have no idea what lies ahead and how things are going to work out. May we remember this. There is this divine force of love calling to us, holding us, drawing us toward love, even though, once again, our primitive brains are pulling us in the direction of fear. Remember this divine love always holding us, always soothing us, always urging us toward greater love in our lives. And all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Until we're together again next week, remember that we're here for love. So face your fear. Be ready for whatever life brings next. Who knows what it's going to be? And love each and every moment of your very precious life. Bye-bye.